This is TLV1.
The Tel Aviv Review.
Hello and welcome to the Tel Aviv Review. I'm your host, Gilad Malach.
And I'm Yael Berda.
Every week we bring you conversations with authors about the books and research and other things that we like. And if you like us, please consider becoming a Patreon supporter by going to our homepage. That's tlv1.fm/Tel Aviv Review. Scroll down to the bottom and click the big red button that says Patreon. Click and support us. Some of you have been doing this for months and years, and we cannot thank you enough. This episode is brought to you by the Israel Democracy Institute, an independent center of research and action dedicated to strengthening the foundations of Israeli democracy. And our guest today is a research fellow there and the director of the Ultra-Orthodox in Israel program. Dr. Gilad Malach, welcome back to the show.
Hi.
So your team at the IDI publishes the so-called Haredi Report every year in an attempt to survey trends among the ultra-Orthodox in Israel. Looking at the most recent one, what changes in the new report, what changes are revealed as opposed to the previous ones?
We can say that in general, first of all, we need to understand the situation. The ultra-Orthodox society is about 13% of the population of Israel, and it's growing rapidly, maybe 4% per year. So if we compare this group, for example, to 2009, at that time they were 10% of the population, and 13 years later, they are 13%. So this is one of the main changes, and we are showing these changes in the ultra-Orthodox society, but also in the Israeli society regarding other fields like education, for example. The ultra-Orthodox society now contains almost 25 from the Hebrew education system. 1 out of 4 students in the Hebrew education system is Haredi. And if you refer to the whole education system, 1 out of 5, almost 20%. So these are changes that we are showing every year. What are the changes? So demographically and connected to education, these are the main things. I can add that regarding the labor market, we can see that there is an interesting process of integrating, especially regarding women integrating in the labor market, almost like non-Haredi women, almost around 80% are participating, are working. Regarding men...
Which is new.
Which is new, yeah. 10 years ago, it was 70%. So in 10 points, in 10 years, it's quite a quick change. And regarding to men, we saw a process of integration towards... It was just 35%. It was very low, maybe the lowest in the world, 35%. 7 years ago, it grew to around 50%, and there was a stability for 6-7 years. But at the last year, we saw another jump after this stability towards 53. It jumped from 50% to 53. So we thought that maybe it's indication of another change, that we will see a continuity in the next years, but maybe we will talk about the changes, the political changes that also might affect this element.
So, but tell us about this astounding gender gap that you show, because what you show is this a very, very strong gap between men and women, not only in employment, like you mentioned, but also in education, in achieving baccalaureate. So how do you explain this?
So first of all, regarding what we see, the differences that we see that the education system, girls are studying secular studies, and the men, boys, almost doesn't study anything. And the main point is connected to the aim of the education system, according to the Haredi eyes. I mean, according to them, women needs, besides their role as the mothers, they also need to feed the family economically, meaning that they need to go to work. So in order, maybe 40 years ago, they could have be just teachers. That was enough. But now they need to go to other fields because there are too many teachers. So the system improved itself, and there is a better secular studies. And even in more and more schools, they are doing matriculations exams. 25% of the Haredi girls now get full matriculation degrees, and so we see this process, and we also it continues to do higher education. 2/3 out of the students, the Haredi students, are women. And one of the most interesting things regarding the differences between men and women is that I think that this is the only society in the world that per hour, women are working less hours than men, also in the general society, also in the Haredi society. But if you compare it, the earnings per hour, Haredi women earns more than Haredi men because they have more abilities. They studied secular studies. And sociologically, it's really interesting, the different roles between men and women in this society, and the fact that the Haredi society says we even change our tradition that women are inside the tent, they are not getting out. We will change that in order to let the men continue religious study, to study Torah.
But does it ever get out of hand? One of the markers of women empowerment is, of course, giving them the skills, giving them the education. And so has it affected that in any way? The family structure and the place of women within the family, within the society. One of the findings that I did find interesting in the report is that there is a slight decline in the birth rate for an average Haredi family, which is also a marker of, modernization, women liberation, what have you. Do we see any of that?
There are some signs of modernization, integration, and some effects on the Haredi society. You mentioned the fertility rate. 20 years ago, it was 7.5. Nowadays, it's 6.5. It's not a great change, but it is a change. We see also a change regarding using the internet. Now, 2 out of 3 Haredi people, they are using the internet, meaning they are exposed to secular data, knowledge, and everything.
I have to say, sorry to cut you off, but I was on a train the other day, and there was this Haredi man on a train to Jerusalem, and there was a Haredi man sitting next to me, and suddenly he pulls out a laptop computer out of his bag and opens it and does whatever it does on this laptop computer. And I thought to myself, what an odd sight to see a Haredi. This is something that was so rare some time ago, and now it's just happening.
You're right. There are some changes, and we already mentioned a few of them. And I can add that there is now a group that we are referring to them as a modern ultra-Orthodox, meaning some people, if in narrow point of view, you might say that they are 10% of the Haredim. In a broad point of view, you might say they are 30 or even more than that. It depends on which point do you refer to. But the point is, there are people who want to continue as a Haredim, but also they want to take some elements of the modern world, the internet, or smaller families, or quality jobs, or higher education, so it affects them. But on the other side, I can say that in the point of view of the mainstream of the Haredi society, they say we will sacrifice the women in some terms in order to keep the values, the religious value of the society. And in general, I can say that they have some successes. In other communities, the fact that women went to work affected communities much more than the Haredi community in Israel.
what we don't see is women having any political power, right? So, I mean, that we don't see that change.
Yes, there was in the margin some claims of Haredi women that says if we are not being elected, we won't vote for the Haredi parties. What we see, and regarding the last election, I mean, not just regarding questions of representation of women, but also some critics on the Haredi politician. At the bottom line, we saw that 90% of the Haredi population voted for the Haredi parties. Meaning that although the critics and although some people are more modern and things like that, at the end of the day, at the day of the election, 90% of them are voting for Haredi parties.
It's interesting because the last time you were here in this studio was just over 2 years ago during the height of the COVID pandemic, talking about how it affected the Haredi community in Israel. And of course, the people might not remember, but it had a devastating effect on the Haredi. I mean, the death toll was much higher than in the general public, and also the fact that the Haredi communities are the most densely populated in the country, and having to stay indoors and all that. And the fact that it was, and what we talked about was the fact that it was to a large extent mismanaged by their own leadership. And then it was all so fresh, so we couldn't say anything with confidence, but we were saying speculatively that it might have some sort of long-lasting effect on the trust of Haredi people in their own leadership, in their own rabbis, in their own politicians. And now you're saying that still, I mean, they're as one relatively monolithic society, so it didn't really have, in the long run, any major influence.
I agree with you. I mean, there was, there were 5 rounds of elections. So one of the rounds, yes, it was the 4th round. It was in the middle of the COVID-19, and at that time there was an inner critic on the Haredi politicians, and there was a decline in the voting for these parties. For example, for UTJ, United Torah Judaism, they lost around 25,000 voters. So we thought that it might affect in the long run, but the results were the opposite, meaning at the last round, it was after 1.5 years of a coalition without the Haredim. So most of the Haredim, and even the modern Haredim, after 1.5 years like that, they felt that the government is against that, and all the newspapers and the politicians all the time shouted, they are against that, they are fighting against that, so they succeeded in taking all the people, even the moderns and the people at the margins, to feel that they are part of the community and they need to support it by voting for the politicians. And the final results were great success of UTJ and Shas.
Do you think there was any truth in that? Was the previous government anti-Haredi, or was it just a rallying cry for Haredi politicians?
I can say that in general, it's quite a rare situation that the Haredim are not part of the coalition, but once in almost 10 years it happens, and sometimes there are some tough governments against the Haredim, like in 2003, the cut in the children allowances, and 2013, the draft law and some other budget cuts. I can say that the last government was quite tolerant regarding the Haredim, so they had to find the places that there were a fight against them, like, the taxes on sweet drinks and some cuts in the margin of the education budget. But really, it was not really tough things. 50 million shekels regarding the budget for yeshivot. I mean, it wasn't a game changer, but the politicians succeeded in giving the impression within the community that it's a great, it's a horrible government, and we need to fight this government and not prevent potential changes that they wanted to do, like the cutting the budget for daycares for yeshiva students and things like that. And they succeeded, although the government wasn't really horrible.
So it sounds like basically every time we might think, oh, here comes a change, here comes a shift, be it through education and employment of women or through all kinds of negligence of the leadership, that at the end there is this structure that is almost functioning like a community within an empire, in which it sees itself as having its own goals and protecting those goals, the learner society, Chevrat HaLomdim, in that in that aspect, or protecting its own interests when there's no representation in the last elections. Do you think that still is the view that there is this, that it is a separate community that sees itself not against, but as very distant from the secular central government?
Yes, I can say that, when in a secular point of view, we refer to integration, we look at it, in as a process that both societies will succeed, will have some benefits from this process. The secular society will be, the general society will have more productivity, and also the Haredi families will have more earnings, and we will feel better together and things like that. But in a Haredi point of view of the mainstream, integration process is very dangerous process. One of the basic identification of the Ultra-Orthodox society is an enclave culture. So integration is in contrast with enclave culture. So for them, it's something that they are doing this integration process just if they don't have any other choice. In that case, it happens. But for example, now when they are entering the coalition again and they have much more power, the politicians are building ways to support the community, ways that will bypass the need of integration, meaning more support for yeshivot, more support for teachers, more support for kind of food stamps, in order that they will prevent the option of leaving the yeshivot and integrating in the labor market, because we won't need to do it, and we will keep, in a better way, we will keep the enclave culture.
And do we see, in times that they're not in power, the very rare occasions, actually those governments who said once a decade, they were also pretty short-lived governments. And that's also right. Something that we need to add into account. Do we see this enclave culture bursting at the seams, maybe eroding in a way that, I think that, if I'm not mistaken, the employment numbers go up when during those times there are certain, well, not huge peaks, but there's a trend in that direction. Do you see a correlation between their being in government and the enclave culture being maintained?
We need to define between women and men, because regarding to women, the process of integration in the labor market, which also include another interesting process of going out, not just working, not just as teachers, but also in other fields, which might include, in some cases, also working out of the community, because there are not enough jobs within the community. So this process is taking place since 2002, 2003, so almost 20 years, and we see the changes, and it goes rapidly, the change, and it's unconditioned to the actions of the government, because this is an inner process, as I mentioned, that the society believes that one of the roles now of women is to work in order to finance the family. But regarding to men, we see a real correlation between the actions of the government or to push the Haredim into the labor market or not to do it. We see correlation. I mean, to push them, in some cases, it's cutting in the budgets, like children allowances or supporting the yeshivot. In other cases, it's other regulations, like the draft law, for example, 10 years ago, 12 years ago, the government decided to lower the age of exemption from the army, meaning the government gave the opportunity to go out to work at the age of 24. It was more than 30, 10, 12 years ago. So this is another change. Another change is connected to supporting people who earn very low salaries. It's a positive, let's say, taxes. Also gave more Haredim and even more male a motivation to enter the labor market. So the correlation exists, and this is the reason why now I'm worried, because there are going to be not things that will push them to the labor market, but the opposite, things that will push them, some of them, out of the labor market. And I'm afraid that the participation rate of the men might decline in the next few years.
So what implications does that have for poverty? So do you see a correlation between going out in the labor market, having that effect of like the push effect? Does it really make economic change within the community at large?
Because the state pensions are supposed to compensate for that, right? I mean, that's why they're being pushed out of the labor market, if I understand it correctly.
Yes,
right?
I mean, at the end of the day, participation in the labor market always is the best way to get out of poverty. I mean, even if the state will support a lot, more people will be under the poverty line than if they are working. So we can see also that, of course, when there was the cut, the great cut in the children allowances in 2003, there was a jump in the poverty rates within the community. But since 2007, 2008, we see a process of decline in the families under the poverty line. It was much more than 50%, and now it's a bit more than 40%, because a lot of people, as I said, women, huge number of women enter to the labor market, but also men enter to the labor market. So we see the results regarding the poverty within the Ultra-Orthodox society. But now, maybe, because of the support that the government will give, we will see a stability. It will continue to be 42% under the poverty lines, family lives in poverty, but it won't be as the last 10 years as a result of work, but just an artificial way, a support of the state.
Also, when it comes to participation in coalition politics in the government, and also what we discussed earlier about COVID, and going back to your eldest question about integration in the wider Israeli project, what do you see about the sentiment towards state institutions? Also, there was a lot of talk about, in the last election, that the far-right party, Religious Zionism, will have a large proportion of young Ultra-Orthodox voting for them. That's also, to me, some sort of participation in the broader Israeli project, isn't it? Do we? First of all, was that the case? And also, do you see that as a form of participation?
We need to define, I think, between the politician level and the level of the Haredi members of the community. I think that in the politician level, we see a process that the Haredim feel that they have much more power. They doesn't want to be another party in the coalition. They are not joining the coalition. They are part of the coalition, and they want to to affect and to change sometimes the atmosphere, the way of life in the state of Israel. We saw an example for that they ask for a basic law regarding studying Torah. This is, it's a change in the definition of the state of Israel until
the
now.
very fact that they ask for a basic law.
And not just, a protection against the Supreme Court. They want it as, one of the basic elements of the state of Israel, not just a slogan of Jewish and Democrat state, but a state that says that one of the basic law is that we are supporting studying of Torah.
Yeah, would be constitutional provision at some point.
Although one could say that that is the highest form of integration when you actually want, like a constitutional amendment for your community. And in that sense, I mean, there's something that is trying to change the nature of the state and the regime, but it is also saying, we have a full stake in this project.
Yeah, in a way, you are right. They are also, and this time also UTJ, they are asking for more ministers' position, something that they didn't ask at the past.
Membership in the security cabinet, that's also
for the first time, for UTJ. But as I see it, the values of the community and the success of the community, for them, it's the main thing and the first thing. So all the things that they are participating in the national level is in order to protect the community and strengthen the community. Regarding the youngsters, some of them, you can say, they are studying in higher education, they're participating in the regular general labor market. So you might see in the future, you might see a change. But regarding participation or voting for the Knesset, we saw that at the last elections, as I said, most of them voted for the classic Haredi parties. And we expected that much more will move and will vote for a Zionist religion party, but not. We saw that they decided to choose the regular, traditional, conservative, ultra-Orthodox parties.
Were you wrong?
It's part of my job.
Yeah, no, I say, but why do you think that your predictions didn't materialize on this?
Because I think that at the last election, for them, the question of the success of the community was much stronger than a question of right or left, or the quarrel regarding the territories or Arabs and things like that. First of all, the community, and that was the success of the Haredi
Because they felt
parties.
under threat, whether justifiably or not.
I have one last question about urban changes. And that's something that you kind of really go into, the amount of Haredim in different communities, in different cities. What are the major effects when you have a significant percent change of Haredim that live in a city?
First of all, we see and that there are some changes, demographically, when I mentioned the fact that in 13 years, the Ultra-Orthodox society, jumped from 10% to 13%, sometimes it's a data. But at the municipal level, sometimes these are the first places that you feel it, that you see it, because these jumps, it really affect specific towns, specific cities. And we see, for example, the economical level or success of a town when more and more Haredim are living in a specific town, there is a decline in the success of the town, of the city. There are less earnings, they are paying some, the percentage of participation in market, the lower percentage affect the payments of the households. So it affects the functioning of the whole municipality. So this is one of the main effects, and this is why one of the reasons why most of the mayors don't like Haredim to build them special neighborhoods, and this is an obstacle to integration process. But on the other side, if we as a state build a special cities for the Haredim, it might affect on very poor cities that have totally doesn't have earnings. They are not independent cities. So also the other option of building spatial cities, especially in situations that we don't have places to build new cities in the center, so it will be at the periphery. So both options are not an easy options for the Israeli society and economy, and also not for the Haredi society.
So from this, it really sounds, what we talked about, the employment patterns and now the living patterns.
Mm-hmm.
It all sounds really unsustainable in the long term.
You can say that one option is that if the integration process won't succeed or won't succeed enough, the state of Israel will be less strong or less successful state as it now, because if more share of the society won't work or won't produce as today, we'll see the effect of the whole state of Israel. And this is why we believe that the integration process is crucial. And if it won't happen, the effect that we say that it affects municipalities nowadays, specific town like Arad or Bet Shemesh, the whole state of Israel in 5 years, in 10 years, the whole state will feel the change.
I have a question that is not in the numbers.
Okay.
Taking that view that says we must have integration for sustainable purposes, to have a sustainable economy. How do you take that view and not also create anti-Haredi sentiment towards the ways of life that are today?
And a backlash within the Haredi community.
As I mentioned, the word integration is dangerous for them. And on the one hand, if we are adopting all of the Haredi values, okay, so man doesn't need to go to work because this is the values nowadays in the community. So in my point of view, we need to adopt a perspective that is fair towards the Haredim. And one perspective that we might take is the way of life of the Ultra-Orthodox society outside of Israel. And I think that if we see that the Ultra-Orthodox society in the United States, for example, most of the men are working, some of them are studying in higher education, most part of the community has matriculation exams for men and things like that. So this is a model. So it's a fair deal to say to the Ultra-Orthodox society, you have a society, you have a Haredi society outside of Israel, and they are not less Haredim than you. So you can adopt it. It will be successful for you. It will be also successful for the state of Israel and the majority, the majority secular or religious majority, but not Haredi majority. So this is a deal that both of us can adopt, and you will continue to be Haredi.
Well, on this note, with a word of inshallah, I would say that any of that might come to pass. Thank you, Dr. Gilad Malach, Research Fellow and the Director of the Ultra-Orthodox in Israel program at the Israel Democracy Institute.
Thank you very much.
And also many thanks to you, Yael, and to Itai Shalem, our producer, and once again to the Israel Democracy Institute for sponsoring this series. And now we've got a request, because most of you listen to us on the Apple Podcasts app, and would like to ask you to please write us a review. Good, bad, ugly, up to you. You too can support us by going to our website and subscribing onto our Patreon campaign. Check out our archive. It has something like 800 interviews to keep you entertained and hopefully annoyed. Like us on Facebook, follow me and Yael on Twitter, and of course join us again next week for another edition of the Tel Aviv Review. And until then, from us here in Tel Aviv, goodbye.